Okay.
Inside the Kraken. Life in the Kraken podcast, failing since 2015. We didn't even start till 2016. Exactly.
Well, we failed early on by not actually starting.
That's true. We did actually do the secret podcast. No one will ever hear.
Mm-hmm.
No one will ever know about. Great takes on things. There was other things happening this episode, but once again, though probably really I should talk about everything else first, then Quentin and Julia, but I don't have the energy, so we're going to talk about the good part of the episode, and then we'll worry about the rest later. So Quentin and Julia went to the underworld. They had a delightful scene with the dragon, in which Quentin lost the button that I guess matters since Quentin loves Fillory so much. Sarcasm.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I guess it matters more for everyone else. Like, it's very inconvenient for Margot and Elliot.
Well, I hope that we get a scene next episode where Elliot like walks up to Quentin and he's like, "Hey, I got kicked out of Fillory. Can I get hitched around the button?" And Quentin's like, "About that."
Yeah, you know how I keep putting Julia and Alice before everyone else? I did that again, and you're fucked. But I did enjoy the dragon scene, if only because I enjoyed it was an interesting take to take with the dragon, like an utter contempt for mortals. It was different than just like it was different than the normal like dragons are above things, they're dragons and you're mortals. There was like this level of contempt that I thought was pretty cool. That I thought worked well. The millennials comment didn't really work because there was nothing in their attitude that
yeah, that
showed them as being millennials.
Like, yeah,
so it was a little confusing.
That comment was like was just another example of the show like reaching for like an easy laugh, and it was like, you know, come on, even you're above this, the magicians, come on.
I mean, the millennials comment would have worked. It's just there wasn't really. I'm just confused as to what exactly they're saying is their behavior. Is it that they like tried to have a deal they didn't stick to? Like, what was the commentary on millennials in that statement? Is my confusion of that joke.
They suck. That's the whole content of that joke. It's just funny because the dragon's old and they're not, and they suck, and millennials suck. And that's you know that's comedy with the capital C.
I guess. Anyhow, the dragon sends them to the underworld and gives them a 24-hour reprieve before, you know, the dragon eats them. That comment was funny, where they were just like, "What are you gonna do with our bodies? Like, a dragon want to fucking eat you." And I'm like, that's fair. You know?
Yeah.
I actually did enjoy. I had a little bit of preview from the WonderCon panel of kind of what the beginning of it was going to be. The beginning of the underworld was going to be like with the lobby, but I did enjoy kind of the lobby area. I did enjoy the pamphlet that was like, "Relax, you're probably not going to hell." It was very, especially compared to a show like The Good Place, which I really like The Good Place, but a lot of The Good Place's whole morality thing is based on that. Apparently, it's like very few people get to go to heaven; everyone else goes to hell. So, like, that system may not be the most. That system's a little bit depressing, but this one I thought was a more interesting, like, chiller version of it. And I kind of like the, you know, they walk in, they're all, you know, the casual nature of the show I felt worked, like, especially when they were like, "Oh, well, it's cool. I have to find a bellhop and let's do the shade," and then all of a sudden the person is just taken away and dragged off. I'm like, or not. That works.
I mean, I don't know what to feel about this whole underworld thing, because like, I don't know. That really triggered my like, but the book is like way better kind of feeling. I guess if I divorce it entirely from that, and you know, ignore the fact that like that an important difference between them is that like in the book, like this is when they go to the underworld in the book, it's like that's the underworld. That's where you go when you die. And the show did what many shows do, which is that they shied away from saying this is where you go when you die, and they presented the like, you know, it's a way station, and you know, it takes the form that makes you comfortable, and it's different for everybody, and when you move on, and we're not going to tell you what happens when you move on. And you know, that's fine. It just doesn't have any of the effect that it did in the book. So like as a location for the show, it, you know, it was as fine as any of their other locations, which are just kind of like, you know, mildly comedic and not actually as interesting as I think they are. I don't know.
That's fair. I guess I didn't have as much problem with it because, hold on. That's a fair criticism. I didn't have as much problem with it because in the book, their reasoning for going to the underworld was so different that it made more sense for how they portrayed the underworld there. I don't know if it would have made as much sense here.
Well, let me put it differently. In the book, it's a very significant moment for Quentin because Quentin has to sort of, Quentin in the book is all wrapped up in himself, and he sort of is in the TV show too. He's very focused on like what he's doing, what his friends are doing, and in the book, he goes to the underworld and he has to kind of confront like the limits of himself. He has to confront that like there is this system that exists outside of him that he can't necessarily change or deal with, and that comes through at the end of the book, as we discussed last week. That there's just certain rules here that you can't break. And he has to deal with what happened to his friend and so on. And I in this world, in this show, he overcomes his fear of bowling. Like it didn't feel like a significant place for him, and it didn't feel like he was like, wow, this is what happens when you die. This changes my whole worldview. This changes the way I'm going to live my life, or whatever. He was just like, it's another place. We have another task to do here.
Yeah, I mean, in this version of the show, I think Quentin's reaction made more like the version they're doing with Quentin in the show. It made more sense for his action to be this way because he's kind of already gone through a lot of that, which is why I thought the big significant statement was when he's talking to Alice's shade. And he's like, I'm going to be here one day. And when I do, like, I'll see you again. And it seems like before the one part I do a quibble with this episode, which we'll get to, happens, like there was finally a moment where he seemed to be ready to move on and like accept how life works.
Well, except to me, like that didn't read as moving on. Like the problem for me was that like it was moving on in the sense that he didn't just like throw her over his shoulder and run. But like, dude, one day you're going to like, when he's 80, he's going to be like, oh, there's Alice, that woman that I dated 60 years ago. It's like, is he never going to date again? Is this, is he going to just get to heaven and be like, screw you, my other 6 wives, I'm going to go with my first love? I don't know. It just seemed kind of weird to me.
I mean, to me, it made more sense though. Well, but I mean, I think it's unrealistic to, there's levels of growing up. I think him saying, I'll see you again and I'm ready to move on, opens him up to the idea that he might love again. The fact that he's not willing to actually that, well, that makes sense to me though. I mean, she's still the version of him right now. Like expecting him to suddenly like saying like him going, I can move on is different than him like consciously being like even if he understands subconsciously that he may love again, him actually saying it out loud is a little different. I didn't actually need that step to me. I think it still works. I think that the statement of that was in a way of him kind of like establishing that maybe he will like be able to move on eventually. Or in his case, it's just that like, look, even the one you're talking about, a lot of people who are like in their 80s will still very fondly remember their first love and what that represents. And it's a very special thing to them, even compared to even with their happily married and have grandkids and great grandkids and whatever. So I don't know if I think that may be just your, at this point, annoyance of the show, possibly rearing its head a little bit.
I think it's, look, I think that moment was fine by itself. I think it's more just my like frustration with the way that this whole like moving on from Alice plotline has gone, and that like the show won't let him move on, in my opinion, because he's still interacting with some form of Alice every single episode, and like I'm not sure if like he's necessarily subtly shifting his reaction to that Alice form every episode or not, but it just feels like from a broader perspective that like he's not, the plot of the show is like not giving him a chance to actually like get away from her for a while.
Yeah, no, I mean that's definitely true, and that's unfortunate. Honestly, that's where, because there's a time jump, a pretty semi-significant one that happens between books 2 and 3.
Yeah.
And the time works much differently in general in the books, because they obviously very rapidly go through like all the school in the books, and then they have a couple years here and there, and then obviously it's unclear exactly how much time has passed in Fillory, because obviously time passes differently in Fillory than in the real world. And then Quentin, obviously there's a time jump again, which the show could definitely have benefited from.
Yeah.
We needed more of those, like, Quentin spent 3 months in Fillory drinking moments, but like longer.
Right.
Because at least in the show, like, there's some like, the show was always going to have complications in how they did this Alice thing, because they just couldn't if they want her to stay on the show and do somewhat similar to what happens at the end of and similar stuff to what she's involved with in book 3, they were always going to have to figure out a way to, like, keep her involved. But, it would have been nice if the show at least had allowed more time jumps to, like, time to pass in the show. So at least in the show world, it, like, given him time to, like, even if episodes couldn't really give him time to move on, like, the show world could.
Yeah, I mean, it's possible to kind of recreate some of that feeling with, like, you have episodes where, the Alice component is very minor. You have episodes where, you montage through, a series of months as Quentin does other things. Like, part of the problem is just that, like, we don't see Quentin doing other things other than, like, Alice and Alice related quests. And so, like, his character and his function within the show is, like, so inextricably tied to her. Whereas, like, if he had a few episodes where he was doing something that wasn't Alice related in any way, then that would, like, really help, I think.
Or even just one would help.
Yeah.
I mean, they clearly made the decision to instead just to make this storyline happen faster. And make it where this is his quest and he goes through it and make it where, because in their world, instead of it being he discovers halfway through this is his purpose, because that's kind of half the purpose of, like, book 3 is he goes, actually my entire purpose behind stuff I'm doing with magic and his hilarious, what his specialty is in magic is, like, designed specifically around doing this one thing, and that one thing is, like, ends up being, like, fixing Alice, which I am, as we've always been sad about, the de-nerdification of magic in the show is going to make, when they fix this, a much less a big deal, obviously. Since, like, in the books, and this is the one time where I'll agree with you on this, is just, like, as the books show, not necessarily better, but this was a way they did it was affecting, like, years pass. He doesn't even realize it. When he finally does realize what can happen, he has to do a lot of research. He has to get a lot of help from people who are way better at magic than he is. He can't even do, like, he has to get, he doesn't even have the power himself to do it. He has to borrow it from someone else. And then, like, it just so happens, though, his specialty is designed to make it perfectly used for this. And he becomes, and, like, the whole point of that is, like, his quest to actually becoming, like, a kind of master magician happens through this. And instead, it is sad that that's not really going to exist here. Like, you have in this episode, Quentin says, like, I always thought something was missing for my spell to bring Alice back. And I'm like, the spell that's never been done before, and is a really big fucking deal. And actually mention it as if to say, like, I almost had it, but I was just missing something. And you're just like, oh. I mean, I'm hoping they're going to address the power. I mean, if nothing else, they better at least address the power issue, because, like, Alice couldn't cast the spell, and she, is way better at magic than Quentin is, and stronger. So I assume they're going to do some sort of, like, everyone's going to channel power or something together. Who knows? But I mean, yeah, I've still enjoyed Quentin's storyline this season, and I think he's been the best part of the show. And they've most figured out he's the version they've best figured out how to make work with their version of the show and it not be, like, terrible. But yes, it is sad at times when you see moments like this where he has lost some flavor.
Yeah,
that would be nice.
My problem with, like, unlike most of the show, my problem with Quentin's stories are almost never, like, the moment to moment what's happening in them or episode to episode. It's just, like, the overall arc of them I feel like is not where it should be.
Yeah, I mean, and it's gonna be hard to see. Like we said before, I don't know how they're possibly gonna do a proper version of the end of book 2, which is, like, to deprive Quentin of that moment, and what the show of that moment is like an actual criminal act. Because, I'm not expecting it to be as good. I'm not expecting it to be as layered as it was in the book, because it's just impossible. But, like, they have to. I don't know what they're gonna do to even somewhat replicate that moment, and it has to happen. Like, it's vitally important that it happens.
Well, here's my question about that, because we talked last episode about how um, his quest in the book begins as one thing and ends being about Julia. Do you feel like they've kind of done this like terrible switcheroo in this episode where it began being about Julia, but is going to end up being about Alice?
Oh, they just combined the book 3 and book 2 stuff together.
Yes.
It's possible. The other version that could happen, the only other one I wonder if it could happen is if Quentin could like, they won't do this, but the other way they could do it is make the actual opposite be where Quentin's quest starts very broad in the book and becomes very personal by the end, to the opposite, where it starts very personal, and then the whole point of this one is he has to make a sacrifice. They could possibly do that. They could possibly replicate some level of stuff. Like, in other words, like Quentin's been like, all the cards get on the table. It's like magic is dying and all this stuff, and they maybe bring this other things up or whatever. And, maybe at that point something, and he has to make a decision that's for once isn't, you kind of talked about like all his decisions, while they're not entirely self-motivated, but they're like self-motivated adjacent. Like he hasn't been out just for himself entirely. He's been out for both Alice and Julia. But like part of the reason he's out for both Alice and Julia is like his own need to like, he feels he failed both of them and he wants to be there for them. Yeah. And he's doing it to the expense of like, of all his other, honestly, to his other friends at this point. I mean, like, especially considering they've shown like, I hope they have another scene where Elliot and Quentin talk, and Elliot like explains how hurt he is that like Quentin's basically just like ignored him.
Yeah, I mean, one thing the show
really
is like, what? I missed that.
I was saying like, it's just like Elliot really clearly could have he needed someone like Quentin to be there who was like, he needed someone like Quentin to be there to be like how he thought the prisoner he had was. Yeah. Just like his friend. Because like Margot is his friend, but she has to also be like kind of co-ruler. So there's like things she has to do that prevents her. Whereas like Quentin, because Quentin basically would be like the Prince Harry of this predicament, where like, he's like a ruler and he can do things, but at the same time, like at the end of the day, he has even less, like he has no real power other than like Elliot can always overturn him at any time. Now he probably has some more power because he's a male, but like they haven't explored that with him either, so we can't really talk about it. But like he could have been around to like just like talk to Elliot, and instead he's been too busy dealing with his own shit. Yeah. And I just wonder if they're going to have something where they explain this. And even with that, I mean, and that could also be like, or if that's even gonna be how they're reversing it, where it's just like, that's why Quentin's forced to like leave. So as I said, it's not gonna have the same impact because Quentin hates Fillory at this point. So
yeah, that the moment when he gave up the button struck me, because like it's not really his button to give, like it's kind of all of theirs, isn't it?
Yes.
So that was definitely a weird moment of him just being like, look, in order to help Julia, who all my other friends don't dislike, I'm going to give up something that is not just my connection to them, but is like belonging to all of them. And it was a very strange thing to do. And I wish. So let's get into this a little bit, because I think that like the show needs to do more interrogating of like the weird relationship that he has with Alice and Julia, and this kind of weird like sort of triangle or bent angle that's going on.
It's not a triangle. That I feel like it needs to be said. Like,
well, that's why I clarified.
They've done a really good job of actually clarifying that like Quentin at this point is completely. I said one of the only good things I thought they did last season, in terms of like some of the stuff they did with Quentin, was when they had that conversation with Alice in which he explained his feelings for Julia. He was like, yeah, I did fall for her, but that happens. She didn't like me. That's fine. And like, you legitimately could tell he meant it. It wasn't just something he was saying. And sure, he's still like attracted to her because that's not going to go away. But like, I do legitimately think that like all of his stuff this season has been like, he's been, hold on a second. I do think like all the stuff he's done with Julia this season has legitimately just been like he's just trying to help her, and he felt like he failed her before, and he doesn't want to do it again as like a friend.
Well, let me reframe, because I'm not talking about romance. I'm talking about the fact that the fact that there are these two women who both have kind of presented to Quentin with this like humongous need. First it's this is for Julia. It's all about this season at least. It's about the aftermath of her rape and the results from that. First the pregnancy, and then the Renard, and then the shade.
First the Renard, then the pregnancy, then the shade.
Well, whatever. They're all intermixed. Anyway, the point is that, and then for Alice, it's her, her death and what comes from that. So like, I don't know. I'm not sure what the show wants me to feel about those, other than I certainly feel how Quentin is like torn between them and his other friends. But I'm not sure like how much he should be dealing with them versus not dealing with them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, they haven't done a great job of properly clarifying exactly. I mean, I understand. It makes sense to me why Quentin's like, well, Julia's my closest friend. I've known her forever, and I was in love with her that part plays in there, but like, she's my closest friend, whatever. Alice was, my first love and my everything. And so like, it makes sense to some degree that he would value them over them. But I do wish they did a little more pushback at times, and other people at least calling him out on it or something, even if it was just like, when Quentin's like, I have to leave again. They had a little bit with Elliot, him there, but like, I wish I could have used a little more there. Or like, Margot being like, just something. Even Penny could be useful at this point. Just being like, yelling at Quentin about kind of like the way he acts around things, or acting like he has, especially because, Penny and Katie could be interesting ones, because like Penny obviously was the person who was next most closest to Alice. And then Katie's the other person who's obviously, the same level, or, slightly a notch below a closeness towards Julia. But it does feel like they haven't quite done the critical, analysis of it. Like, you're right. It's not entirely, especially this episode, things got muddied, because I honestly felt like they actually kind of pushed this idea that, like, in terms of romance, if anything, this idea that, like, almost Julia is actually, like, going more towards the Quentin thing, more so than anything else. Which,
well, so that was my problem with the choice she makes at the end, which is that like, as long as it's all about Quentin trying to help them, it's a certain kind of story. But as soon as it becomes like them trying to help him, which this Julia thing takes a turn for that, then things get a little uncomfortable for me, and it becomes a little closer to like, dude surrounded by beautiful women kind of a harem story. I do think to what you said a minute ago, that like, I think part of the issue is that, as we discussed, like they've taken away, they've de-nerdified magic. They've really de-emphasized, like, at this point, Quentin, his enjoyment of and kind of, wish for fantasy and for Fillory, to the point where, like, if you ask me how to define Quentin's character in the novel, it's like, he works at magic, he cares about at Fillory and wonder and all that, and he deals with these two women, and he's kind of, as he said in this episode, socially maladjusted, and it's like they've taken like 2/5 of that out of his character at this point, and so like it becomes this really kind of shallow person, because his only goals in life seem to be these two women, and it just doesn't work for me.
I will have to say quickly, like, it's not a harem. That's just cruel. Don't. I'm not. Even in their version, I know, but like that's pushing it. Even by like that's like an insult that cannot be leveled here. I like for any reason, just because of like what that would actually represent. I understand what you're saying. It's more uncomfortable to get there. I still think at this point, even though I got shades of that more felt like just because of how television normally works, based on how the show works as of now, until they actually like, they could ruin this, at which point then we can complain about it. I chose to believe this is more like Quentin and Julie are just like the closest of friends, and she realized that she basically had a realization of like what he's been trying to do for her and kind of what it is, and so she wanted to make a sacrifice for him to make up for what her mind has been like. I wish she had said this like more. You know, like they could have actually had a discussion in which you could have brought up like, you've been sacrificing Fillory, you've been sacrificing like helping your other friends for me. You know, you've been sacrificed to some degree, like, you know, dealing with Alice at some level. And so like, you know, they could have actually had that discussion at some level.
Well, and they didn't, and on that level, it reminds me a lot of the Penny decision to join the library for Katie, as these people just keep making these like ridiculously like self-destructive decisions for the people they care about.
Though this one at least
doesn't feel necessary. I mean, here's purely on a logistical level, like there's no reason they couldn't have taken both those kids.
My assumption is that the way they made it sound to me was the spell the dragon had cast only allowed them to bring back one extra shade. That was the point.
They did not spell that out, in my opinion, but I don't know.
That seemed to be the implication of what was happening. I agree they didn't flat out say it, and they probably relied a little. They thought they were showing it more than they did, but that was clearly the implication, was that there was room for her to take back one shade. Though I'm also just like, where is the shade now? Like, is the shade like a ball of light? Is there like a little girl just back with them? Like, that was my, like, it made sense when Julia went back with her shade, because I'm like, well, okay, I assume they would just fuse on the way up, but like, what exactly is Alice's shade now in the real world?
God only knows. I think it's some kind of like anti-Niffin or something.
Maybe. I guess that's possible. I mean, yeah, they didn't have. I will say this, at least in this case, based on the assumption that I think they tried to say in the episode, which is you can only bring back one extra shade because they were counting the shades as a separate entity. At least in this case, Julia's decision at least had repercussions of like, if, you know, since that's the, if, you know, I agree the rules aren't entirely put up, but since those were the rules they were clearly trying to lay out, it was literally a choice between her bringing back her shade and Quentin potentially getting Alice back in any shape or form. And one thing I thought maybe that made that kind of work, there's like, I'm torn on that. Well, let's let the plane pass. So the one key difference, at least I felt, between Julia's decision and Penny's decision is that, at least based on what it looks like the rules are supposed to be, like there was literally a binary choice of either she could bring back her own shade or she could bring back Alice's. And this kind of led to a both thing I really liked this episode and thing I didn't really like in this episode. The part I really liked is they finally showed kind of how Julia could act without her shade, like be a little different in terms of like, they maybe went a little bit too far, but this idea of like memories of who she was can at least help her kind of replicate her feelings and make her not like just totally, you know, she's still kind of action oriented. But like,
I felt like they went too far in this episode, in that like it seemed like I don't know whether it was the performance or whether they were telling her to do that, but it definitely felt like she was like suppressing emotions as opposed to not having them, and I'm not sure that that's like literally what should be happening here.
It's not entirely there yet, but they finally begin. They really begin showing a difference here. And one reason I'm annoyed about, you know, I wish they'd had a better conversation, because they could have expressed this idea of like her being like, look, me not having my shade sucks, but I'm learning to deal with it, and I can still be. I don't have to be the person I was when I first didn't have a shade. Right. You know, whereas like Alice is like an amoral monster. And not anything close to what she used to be. And so like giving her back, they could have this conversation of like giving her back her shade could allow her to actually be someone again. Whereas I can still be a person of like, I want to be at some level, even without my shade, which I think, you know, which is, I think is supposed to be part of it to help her kind of grow into like her future, like place eventually. They didn't, I mean, admittedly, they didn't quite have that conversation, but I do feel there was enough there where I kind of at least kind of liked that idea. They at least sort of seemed to set that up. I agree they went too far, because the only, you know, they didn't have enough in the episode of like the beginning of the episode. I really liked the moment where Quentin was like, well, I hate to mention this, but like I do have a baby tooth tail, and she's immediately pulled it out.
Right. That's yeah.
I could have used more of those, or at least could have used them more reflecting how maybe like the lack of shade didn't entirely mean what people thought it meant. and things like that in terms of like, because you have that moment where like in the bowling alley and Quentin gets the strike and she's like, "Yay, Quentin!" and she's clearly happy for him, and they could have explained what that meant more.
I don't know if she was happy for them in that moment. I felt like she was more like really obviously going, I should support Quentin. The instinct is that like she knows intellectually that like when somebody does something right in a sports context that like that's how you praise them, and she did that.
Well, this is where the performance part comes in because there was enough conviction in her voice that it wasn't entirely just like the fake version of that.
Yeah, so this is why I think it's like it's possibly a performance issue. I don't know.
I mean, there's some weird things there. I do think they at least need to have somewhat more. They at least need to understand how they have to start making her differentiate and that idea. And I saw enough there where I did like that. Now, of course, my problem with this point was kind of what you said, which is this finally seemed like the moment in which they were going to have Quentin, like, even if it was just for like 2 episodes, maybe, like, let Alice go, and then he was going to like be like, all right, and then go off and maybe like do stuff. And then maybe the end of the season, they set up something where Quentin then says his quest now is to figure out how to get back in the underworld, get her shade back, or like whatever. And then they immediately, like, instead of giving any time, a minute later, like, nope, we have Alice's shade. So your storyline gets to be about Alice some more still. And so like that did kind of annoy me, the whiplash of like it finally seeming like they'd hit their endpoint, because they've been at least, they've been figuring out different ways to bring Alice back, but make her be like different, like lesser for like not as clearly her. And it was getting more and more removed, and they finally seemed there. And then they like kind of took this away because I guess they decided if they have to choose between ones, they didn't want to like make a world in which Julia, I guess, became normal again, because they felt that would ruin the book version, even though at this point she's so different from the book version, it shouldn't even matter.
Puzzling out their intentions is so difficult. I think that like another thing that bothered me a little bit was just that like we don't get to really see, we don't get to hear what him and Alice are talking about really. They just keep cutting back to him like beaming as they're like talking and Julia's kind of watching. And it's like, and the problem with that is that like Quentin and Alice were together for the first season of the show, and we understood through their interactions like why they liked each other. And now that she's been gone for so long, we still need like some of that. We can't just like coast forever on like they were so happy together.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, this is a good example of when sometimes it's okay to tell. I think they would have been a lot better to have given like an extra 2 minutes or so to just cutting between Julia talking to her shade and Quentin talking to Alice.
Yeah.
And then both having conversations. And then like you could have Julia and her shade talking, and maybe then she comes to peace with herself about this. She can express some of the things we expressed. Just some of these ideas of like her figuring out who she is and what that means and how she doesn't have to be this. And the shade, like, kind of in the shade kind of acknowledging like if Julia had her shade, she would make this decision, because that's kind of clearly part of this also, was that like this is the decision she would have made if she could, and she was a whole person, and she was a technical whole person.
Mm-hmm.
And then it would have fit really, especially because at this point it's also entirely possible that a portion of the sacrifice that Quentin makes in the books has actually been legitimately transferred to Julia.
Yeah.
And they may, in fact, just be giving. It's entirely possible, because there's been a lot of people do wonder if the show actually thinks Julie is the main character, regardless of other things. Which there's a lot for the show purpose to actually like. Well, Alice too would agree as well, actually, but especially Julia. And and if they wanted to really make that clear, they could actually just shift one of the key things that happens to Quentin and have it happen to Julia instead.
They could. I mean, we'll see. But I mean, you're right in that the episode, the Quentin and Julia storyline in this episode, I think, need a little more time. And you know where they could have gotten the time from? Anywhere else in the goddamn episode.
Right. I mean, that's just the thing. It's like this is the only part of the episode I legitimately enjoyed, and I just wish I could have had more, because I felt at this point everyone else had to get stuff because their plots needed to move forward. And it's just like, we had the other plot threads.
Did they need to move forward? Did they move forward?
My point is that's clearly the idea. Is they needed they did in terms of pure A to B stuff. Margot is now going to the Fae, which she has to because she has to get Finn back. Elliot's been shipped off for Fillory presumably because he suggested there be a democracy. And Fillory was like, no, or something. Penny's like, we'll get to this. Penny's clearly point is like, you know, I have to go to the poison room, and he's trying to figure this out, and he meets a character who like he somewhat works with because she just yells at him a lot. And then Katie's point is like her whole thing, and Katie's point is kind of like her dealing with Renard, but also Penny, figuring out Renard, Penny stuff, but more importantly, just her being the person at the end for when. Because also we needed the storyline of the senator about how he realized he needed to kill Renard, going to her as well. So technically, all those plot lines moved up. Now, did I need anywhere near the amount of time spent on any of those plot lines for that to happen? No. Quite frankly, if the show had actually just left them all out and decided they were going to spend 20 minutes of the next episode dealing with it, and instead spent like almost the entirety of this episode just dealing with Julia and Quentin, would that have been a better episode? Without question.
Yeah, that's my thing. Like, you know, you're two of your characters are going to the underworld where the dead live, and they're going to search for themselves there. Like, what more do you goddamn need? What is like, you know, oh, my sloth got turned into a rat, like, compared to that? Like, just focus on a goddamn story.
What I probably would have done is I didn't need to see the reasons why the senator turned on Renard, or at least I didn't need to see the extended sequences of it. Maybe they could have had one scene, and then, you know, at that point, I don't really, since, you know, you could have introduced a new character with Penny, and that's about it, and then maybe had the part at the end where you could have the rats actually happen because you needed Margot to say it was her fault and then her leave. But that still's like, what, 10 minutes of an episode? And it was probably more like 20. And then you could have given that extra 10 minutes that you now had, or even more, to Julia and Quentin. And then they could have had more. They could have had better conversations. They could have experienced, as you said, being in the underworld more and what that means. They could have explored more this idea of how Julia's acting. Maybe Quentin and her could have had a conversation about it.
I will also point out briefly that like the scene in the bowling alley was like entirely devoid of like actual emotional content other than the weirdness of her seeing non-Reynard Richard. Because, you know, to bring back my complaint from the first season, like the free trader Beowulf people like mean like nothing in the show.
Well, yeah, the only one who meant anything was Richard, which is why you said that was the only reason. That was like the whole point. But yeah, I mean, it didn't quite work as well. I mean, I like them bringing it back. At least it showed some stuff that it maybe could have meant more if they at least had spent more time there, because then like Julia could have reflected, and maybe they could have shown how Julia's emotions around them were weird, and they could have commented upon it. And they could have talked about Quentin some more, and it could have worked. Like it does feel like this definitely feels like another real big missed opportunity of just like, you know, this should have been some, you know, in a way, this could have been a weird bottle episode in the underworld, and it probably should have been, because the other storyline, you know, or like a bottle episode outside of, like I said, like 10 minutes, you need to just briefly set up the rest of these storylines. Because not much real. I mean, was it really interesting to have the scene where like Elliot and Idri almost have sexy time? Sure. But like it still wasn't really that necessary. You know, and yeah, you said you had that moment of like him talking to a naked Josh, which is kind of like, eh. I mean, other than like, it's still a little weird because I'm like, but Josh suggested the governor, so why is Elliot being kicked out?
I mean, I think that like, you know, when she talked to the fairy and the fairy was like, you're dealing with a power that like is utterly capricious and whimsical, that I don't think it was like, you know, Elliot's being punished for democracy. I think it was just like random shit is happening for random reasons because some all-powerful random thing is just fucking with them.
Oh, you think? Well, yeah, that was the other part. They brought up this idea that there was another group they angered, and I'm wondering if that's how they're going to bring in the whole God thing, the God's idea from the books. I mean, it seems like the best way to do it. Though it seems a little weird if that's, you know, like, are they bringing, is like, they just mean Ember in this case, or do they mean like the grander gods thing that happens in book 2?
I don't know. Not enough information yet, but clearly it was very important to set that up.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. If that's the case, he could be kicked out, and obviously now he has to figure out how to get back in. And, you know, he's like the original path or something is there, which I'm just like, okay, does that mean I mean, of course, I'm kind of just like, can't they just time travel again to just like Quentin and Julia did? I don't think that thing had one use.
That never happened. Shh.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Let's not think about that. Let's not think about the fact that the underworld apparently exists like outside of time loops. Let's not think about any of this too deeply.
No, that makes sense. I'm okay with that one. It makes sense to me. The underworld would exist outside of a time loop. Like that makes sense. The underworld should be separate from time. In a world in which if the underworld existed as the show explained it, it would make sense that it exists outside of time, because at that point the afterlife is eternal. So of course time has no impact.
Right, but does that mean that they've gone to the underworld 37 times and then like vanished when the time loop reset?
It's possible.
Or are there 37 copies of them in the place? Like, I don't know.
There's no copies. I just think it makes sense that probably the way it seems to suggest is that they had been there multiple times, but they couldn't, but they just disappeared before they could go. So that seemed to be what the most likely version of it was. So they never were able to, and they were erased. And so they knew it, but like they had residual effects of it, but like, there was no actual version of there. That, or it's just that like, their body has shown them die, but they never actually showed up each time.
Who knows?
I mean, yes, that's another example of a kind of cool thing that they could have explained more and not just kind of left as a side comment. But, this is what happens. All right. Is there anything, since we've lumped together the other four, I literally described what happened in the 4 parts of the other episode. Is there anything in particular you find interesting with any of that worth mentioning?
Worth mentioning. Elliot is getting increasingly comfortable with just poisoning people. That's a thing that's happening now. Last episode was roofies. This episode was truthies. Like,
No, the
truthies. I'm not sure which one.
Was kind of funny, but yeah, that's true. It was annoying that that's what it took for Margot to tell him. Does this happen exactly as I bitched about this potentially happening like 3 podcasts ago?
Plus he just like sent Margot to the dungeons, like in lieu of like having a real conversation with her. Which I think Elliot's undergoing some problems here.
Yeah, I mean,
he's lost his way a little bit.
I'm hoping the idea is supposed to. I mean, yeah, I'm wondering if like they may be trying to do something different with Elliot too, based off of like how he's going to actually ultimately be king and stuff. It's hard to say, but yeah, I mean. It felt like maybe more like they didn't do quite a good enough job of like, it seemed like the implication was supposed to be that like, I don't know what else to do with you right now. I don't have time to have a conversation with you. So I'm sending you to the dungeons because I can't trust you, yada, yada. And extreme version of everything. But
yeah, the democracy thing is also weird because like, I don't know. It's hard to understand where they sit in relation to Fillory. Like, is it their goal to sustain Fillorian traditions or change them? And we've been talking about this all season. If your goal is to like change them and improve the country, then like, maybe the experts that the dean set him up with should have said like, try some democracy, or he should have thought of that himself, instead of just like embracing, being the imperial power.
Yeah, I do wish they had given us more. That was just a really interesting potential storyline. I wish they had actually shown him working with these people, even just once. Because, yeah, it does seem like the best thing for Fillory might be some version of England's like system where like they clearly need the king because it's like ingrained in them, but like they could shift to a version where like the king doesn't have absolute power.
Right.
And it does seem like, because that's kind of what the governorship was seeming to be setting up. It was like a version of like a combination of like ancient Rome and England now, basically.
Yeah,
like a system where it's like, we're gonna have people. I'm technically in power, but effectively speaking, these governors would be the ones actually enforcing laws on you at all times. So it's like you are being governed by this. I'm just kind of here, serving as like a figurehead to like, and for important matters, things happen. And I may have certain controls of things, like to make sure, like you all don't try to invade each other. But
yeah, there's a lot of threads here that like once you start pulling them, you're like, what? Because like. There was that episode where they talked about classicism, but like, is this a post-scarcity society because they have magic, or is it not because they have to like share the magic, or divide the wellspring or whatever? Like, is Elliot being a dick by, being a rich guy in a palace ordering all this special food to be made for him, or is he or is it fine because king is like kind of symbolic and nobody is suffering in his country? Like they don't really like explain any of that shit.
Yeah, they don't do it. The Foo Fighters should have been a better way of explaining this, and they dropped it too much. And then, of course, he roofied them, and
yes,
now they're gone.
They're just incapacitated forever.
Yeah, I mean, like it would have been nice if they'd figured out how to like explain that a little bit more. You know, explain like they even could have just explained like the country become what it was because there hadn't been like they just hadn't had people in charge for so long,
right?
And like. Now that they have real magicians back, the magicians can just like help make things appear, and with money and like you know they can do things like when they were like, we can't build a statue to Alice, and it'll take too much resource. And like, wait, we have magic, we'll just build it that way, and like more things like that,
right?
You know, or like, or even if, like
clearly,
if they
there clearly is an economy here because they needed gold to pay their soldiers,
right? But I meant like I was saying like. There's versions they could have, with the economy they could have like done with like our economy was kind of screwed up because we had to rely upon resources opposed to like magic, and we can't act like the common people can't access magic, you know, and they could have played into more like some of the classist stuff that actually happens in the books in terms of magic. It happens to a little bit because, you know, one of our big criticisms of the books, and one they at least seem to try, but not necessarily the best way of doing in the show, but try to address, was that like, you know, magic in the books was basically like, you're either at Harvard or like you're this random dude on a street who's like selling drugs to get magic.
Right.
And there is no like in between. And, you know, there's no community college of magic, or hell, there's no like state school of magic. Where like people learn, you know, people who are like who can't go to Harvard are learning how to, you know, do this. And so like
and what you're talking about is I think the way it was in the book, because I think the Fillory residents in the book did not do magic. They just were magical.
Yes.
Like they were, you know, talking bears or whatever, but they didn't actually do magic the way the magicians did, which is, as you're saying, like why they needed Earth people to come and rule them. And the show is kind of screwed with that.
There's people who could do magic, but they were very rare, and they generally weren't as powerful as the people on.
Mm-hmm.
Like there were people who could do magic still in Fillory, but they weren't like common. And the whole point was that yes, like the Fillory children could always generally do magic. Like the people who came from Earth, who were like the children who took over, would always come, and then there was always the issues, and then you know that explained better why the children of Earth needed to do this, because they were the ones who could theoretically be better trained with magic because they weren't as a part of it, I guess, as the Fillorians were. But yeah, they never really explained that well, which is just a little annoying. And it's created like a lot of questions. It's like you said, one of the biggest problems of the show is that like, you know, even when it works episode to episode, like in terms of like moment to moment, it's like when you start putting it together is when everything just kind of like implodes.
Yeah.
And like, that's why, I mean, that's generally why, like, I mean, last season, the problem was it honestly didn't even work a lot of times moment to moment, which was the problem, which is why it was hard to enjoy the show at all at times.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it did work sometimes, and there were episodes we obviously enjoyed some parts of it, but that's kind of why, whereas at least this season, they figured out the moment to moment stuff, but that doesn't, unfortunately, you can't undo like the long-term planning you've done in other stuff, and it's just, yeah, it's not entirely working, and it will always kind of infect the show to some level, even if next season they continue to improve, let's say, and they now nail moment to moment, and let's say they nail seasonal arcs, you know, it's still going to be infected by what's happened in previous seasons. Like, you know, there's only so much you can get away from, and that's just a sad state of things, where like, you know, even as much as I want to at times the stuff I like about the show, I have to acknowledge like there's no way it can get past certain points, because unless they just do like a soft reset, like there's just things you can't ignore that are clearly going to come into play, and when you think about it, the show's going to fall apart.
Yeah, pretty much.
Leaves you now with the episode in which we effectively have talked about Quentin and Julia, and there was literally like 4 other storylines, and we're just like, I don't really think any of them are worth talking about.
I have some nits to pick with a couple of them. Did the center he mind control like have a heart attack and die off screen, or was it just like momentarily discomforted?
I don't think he died, but I do think he like got very sick. He's probably like in the hospital.
Because they didn't actually make that clear, like what had happened.
It sounded like, just based on him not freaking the fuck out on an even more level, that like he had caused the senator to have like, he had so thoroughly forced the senator. I think the idea was he had so thoroughly mind controlled him against his nature that his body like had a fit. You know, as opposed to like, for example, like with his wife, where like clearly he had been mind controlling her at some level, but like she also clearly did like love him at some level. So it, the degree to which he had, I think it was trying to show an implication of like the degree to which he has to force the change can have an effect on the human body. Because obviously, what he did to the senator was like, that senator, better or worse, whether or not you agree with what that senator thinks, thought what he was doing was correct. You know, and was never going to change his mind based on his own so-called principles, and like he got forced to. But yeah, it was a little weird. I basically picked up that he wasn't dead from the concept of I assumed he'd be freaking out a hell of a lot more if he just killed the dude.
Yeah, well, so the other issue I have with the storyline is like it's terribly unclear to me. Like the vagueness of Reynard's goals and the vagueness politically of his goals are like interacting in a weird way that's like shitty. In that like Reynard keeps going like we're gonna do wonderful things together, but I don't know what that means. Does he want the guy to be president, and then like does Reynard want to take over the country? And like, I mean, I don't know what Reynard wants beyond on like a level beyond just like fucking with the people around him. And so like it's very unclear what he wants to do with his son. And then on the other hand, like the son's goals that like are being stymied by Reynard are like books for children, farms. Like, who is this guy? What politics is this? Like the other terrible senator's like problem was that like he wanted some extra money for something in exchange for school books, which is like, I don't know. That was Frank Capra plots in that moment. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, you get the sense. All I get the sense is he wants to be president, and he clearly thinks he wants to help people. But you're right; you don't know what that means because, like, what's his politics of like how he wants to help people? Is he like, does he believe, is it political any mean he believes in a certain way to help people or not? Because, like, hypothetically speaking, all politicians at some level think they're helping people.
Right.
Even ones that you would disagree with. There are versions of politicians who I disagree with like heavily, but if you talk to them in their soul, they're like, no, I'm helping people and this is why, and they'll explain why. And I may disagree with what their assumptions are, or facts may disagree with them, but they like believe they're helping people. So yeah, it is unclear. I mean, the close thing with Renard was I guess it made sense that he wants him to be president, and then Renard will be able to like wreak havoc on a grander level, I guess, even though he can already do what he wants. He's a god.
Yeah, I guess this is why it doesn't make any sense to me.
I mean, the other sense I got was there was a level of, I think, like legitimately he cares about his son. It's some, version, and like just trying to help him, but to be like, even if in trying to like corrupt his son into being more like him, I guess.
Yeah,
but yeah,
I think that's clear. But like the next step is like not clear at all.
Yeah, all I got was his son wants to be president to help people. I don't know exactly how he wants to help them. The only stuff that ever brought up with him are like school book for children and some farm bill.
Yeah.
I don't know what his politics are. His speech like pattern was clearly based on like a lot of Obama type stuff.
Yeah.
In the one speech they show given, even though there's some tone deafness to that, obviously, because like it's like a young white dude doing it.
Well, yeah, they're also still exploring white privilege, which is what I thought that the thing about his wife was about, which was interesting, was him realizing that like he's kind of secretly been suppressing her this whole time or oppressing her this whole time without really knowing it, and now he's aware of that fact, and so like that's interesting as far as it goes, but they're still not like.
Well, they haven't done enough to make like. I agree, and the white privilege stuff could have done they could have done some really interesting stuff if they wanted to use the magic to show like white privilege, but use magic as like a way to further do that,
right?
And kind of suggest how much easier it got, but they haven't been willing to fully follow through with it. And instead, the hodgepodge you've given me is like the bills, and then like I said, the one speech you give was like an Obama-esque type speech without the self-awareness of why him saying that means something different than like Obama saying it,
and without specifics, like Obama was not an empty like hope and change candidate. Like he espoused that slogan and then had like important policies that were specific that he wanted to enact. underneath.
Yeah,
that.
but I'm not even getting into that. Let's assume he was just a hopeless, but like it still means something different for him to be.
Yes, yes, it does.
That, and since all the show has given me is that's all I'm really addressing at this point. But yeah, I mean, that's clearly his thing. And then Renard's goal is clearly to corrupt him to do something. But yes, it is kind of unclear exactly like why Renard is like, even if it was just a line of like Renard being like, I'm tired of like the power grab I've been doing of blah, blah, blah. And it's clear before he was like clearly only doing what he was doing as like a petulant child acting out against Persephone.
Yeah.
Because that's kind of the other lore thing they revealed, which is about Our Lady Underground existing, and it was Persephone, and Persephone had left, and that could actually play into potentially some of the god stuff if they bring in the book 2 things. And
that was definitely all kind of interesting setup for stuff that we'll find out later, I guess.
Yeah, like I thought that was another good example of a nice little extra piece of business, both with Renard and Julia. Like Renard basically reveals that he's been doing this because he's like clearly very angry that Persephone left. And it clearly like hurt him. And I could actually use more of that because then Renard would be a character.
Right.
And then Julia just being like Julia's reaction there, an actual like emotional reaction towards it, which could have also suggested something, which like partially could be that maybe they could bring up the fact that maybe her shade's not all the way gone, or maybe like the shade doesn't actually take all your emotions. It seems like good stepping points to have discussions about what this means. And they just kind of, instead of like, someone like me having to like parse it together through like acting and script lines and make cobble together a version of a story that kind of exists in on screen, but kind of doesn't.
Yeah, there's a lot of assembly required here. One of the only thing I thought were worth noting about the Penny storyline is that the new character whose name I've forgotten because they said it once, but they said Meadow twice, so I'm going to call her Meadow for now. That like the danger sometimes of like these pop culture references is that like it becomes very easy for them to point to a new character and say, "Oh, that's a Meadow type," and then like not fill that in any deeper. So I hope that they like don't just leave it at that going forward.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of like that character. I think she has a good energy with Penny.
Yeah.
Hold on. And as we talked about in like the last edition of the podcast, like it's kind of important to have the right energy with Penny, and the show generally fails at putting the right characters with him.
Yeah.
And she does seem like a nice fit. So like, especially if Penny now is just going to be stuck in the library all the time. And then just having astral projection sex with his girlfriend. Which is clever. Fair enough. But like, yeah, it does seem a little weird. Because clearly, obviously, this storyline setting up there, he's going to get the book in some way, and we'll see what happens. I also wonder if, they said the original way was, the other one is maybe this is how they force Penny to learn how to use magic again, because then he could actually travel more than just himself to Fillory.
Well, I mean, do we need to comment on the fact that like they're teaching him ass magic?
I mean, it's kind of funny. I mean, I took it as more like that's one of the types of magic they're teaching him. Because they're kind of very vague on the magic they taught him in the book. He's just kind of like, I learned how to not use my hands. It's without my hands. It's a very rare type of magic. Not really.
I have a question too. Like, what
too in depth with it? So if they want to do a combination of stuff, I'm kind of fine with it because it's not like the book really gets into detail about it.
I think you could have for a second there. But your recording probably has it.
Okay. I was just talking about, I was saying like the book was unclear about how his magic worked. What were you going to say? You said something else?
Yeah, I was going to say, what was I going to say?
Does it involve Penny and his magic?
Yeah. I had it a second ago.
Libraries? Magic?
Oh, I know what I was going to say. Okay. So like, Mayakovsky, right? That he turned down to go with the librarians because Mayakovsky wanted him to do stuff and he wasn't sure if Mayakovsky was even going to help him. Mayakovsky was trying to save magic, but like the fairies save magic, right? Because magic was only dying due to the wellspring, right?
Maybe. It's unclear. That could also be the whole. It's very likely that it's possible they're setting up this idea that the other force that they weren't accounting towards is also fucking with magic. So it's unclear. It is also entirely possible you were correct and the fairies fix magic. I don't know. I'll just say this right now. But what was your thing you were trying to say with Mayakovsky?
No, I don't know. It's just like, I don't know. That alters the situation in some weird way that I'm not sure. I'm not sure whether that makes Penny's decision worse or better. But
I see what you're saying. It's like magic could fix itself, then Mayakovsky theoretically would have just helped him immediately, and it means Penny had waited like a month.
Yeah.
Or however many days pass. Yeah, that's possible. I mean, I guess my bigger issue with Penny has entirely always been that what Penny got for his like lifetime service of solitude just doesn't seem to be like worth it. Like his upfront thing was just he found a name.
Yeah, and he like and now he has to spend like an eternity in a place where like the camera is always at a shitty angle. Which like by the time it was like this is the scene where he opens a fridge and looks at everybody's lunches, and I was like, why is the camera still like this? Fuck you for choosing this as your way of expressing the Netherlands. Fuck you.
Well, that's not the Netherlands. That's just the library. Library exists between.
Whatever. The point is, it's terrible.
I mean, my bigger problem with it is more just that I wish they'd at least given. I also wish they had been like, well, we can't fix your hands right now, but here is something to let you use magic, like briefly, as something. It feels like he didn't get enough initially for this lifetime servitude contract. Yeah. Like it still would have been a short-sighted decision, but if let's say they had gone, let's say two things had happened. One, he got the name, and two, he got the ability to use his traveler skills, like briefly to help other people. And let's say they actually needed to do that for a reason. Then at least it would have been like, oh crap, this is a terrible decision for him, but he's making it for others, but he feels like he has to because right now it's absolutely necessary.
Yeah, the equivalent would be like if in that scene in the bank heist, like Quentin had been like, okay, Alice, if you solve this for me, you can you can go free, and Alice was like, thanks, sucker, and she like went free, and then like Quentin was like, well shit, that didn't work, and then they like hit the door with a rock and it opened.
Yeah, like if they had a reason for like Penny had to get them out, and like it was the only way to save Kate. Like let's say Katie got in a situation with people, and it was like he had to save her.
Yeah.
Or they got stuck in the underworld or something like that, and then suddenly Penny has to have the ability to use his magic. He's the only one who could save them. Then at least that decision fits better. I could even have lived with the idea that if let's say like Bernard had attacked Katie specifically, and Penny had witnessed it firsthand, and in his mind, he's like, whatever it takes to stop this dude. I've now seen a physical, as opposed to now he's just like, they were trying to go with this idea that Penny's just like, no, you say he's evil, I believe you. I trust you. I don't need proof of this type thing. But which is noble, like to, kind of this idea of like, I don't need to see something terrible happen. I just believe you when you tell me. Mm-hmm. Which, if the show was more willing to go towards stuff, could be an interesting way of talking about how, like, there's always been a complaint at some level of when, like, like the complaint now a lot of people are having where you keep having those articles that come up where, like, guys are like, I pretended to be a woman for, like, one day on the internet. It was terrible. We should help women. And then women are like, why didn't you just believe us when we said this in the first place? And so, like, there could have been something with that they could have done with it, but they didn't really follow through with that either. So instead, it's just like, it just still comes off as a really weird decision that it felt like. I mean, they would have found this dude eventually, right? Like, it doesn't seem like it would have been that impossible.
Yeah, the problem, to me, it's not a question of, like, belief and proof, but a matter of, like, urgency and necessity. Because he's sort of just like, well, this is a bad guy, and bad guys deserve to die, so I might as well throw my life away to get this bad guy. Where it's like, that doesn't really make sense, and nobody really thinks like that. And it would have made a lot more sense if it was like, somebody's in danger, and in order to help them right now, I have to make this choice.
Or even, like I said, or a more immediacy had been given to the issue of like he saw him in person, and it like, or even if it was just like that part, I could even have lived with the part where like when Renard showed up to attack them all in the school, and like let's say they didn't have this, like they didn't have the kid yet. Let's say Renard had just showed up to attack them because he was trying to get information from them, and Penny even seeing that had forced it.
Yeah.
Like, you know, that could have, I think it never, the urgency never felt right. Like, you know, the urgency was like, I need this name right now, even though, like, I really feel like they would have found it eventually. Like, you know, they would have figured out a way, or they would have kept going, or at least maybe he could have been like, no, and they could have given an episode in which they couldn't find anything, and then like everyone freaks out because they think they're never going to be able to stop him, and like then he makes a decision, and then there's an emotional urgency there. Like, that could have worked as well. Instead, and then, you know, coupled together with, you know, we really need that episode where Penny really felt not having magic.
Yeah.
Because that was the other part. Because his other big thing was like, I get to use magic again. I'm like, did we ever really clarify if you like magic? Because I don't think we did. Well, and they could have really used it.
The storyline continues to just be like pretty broken.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely one of those ones where, you know, they don't, you know, it had to lay out their own blueprint, and it hasn't entirely gone well. Well, I mean, anything else?
No, let's just stop. Let it end.
Once again, I have to reiterate, this episode was fine. I liked a lot of the stuff this episode. Quentin's still fine, especially as long as he's off on his own non-Fillory related adventures. Like, at this point, I almost would rather just the show just be like, you know what? This show's just about Quentin and Julia and Alice, because that's what it is anyhow, so let's just ignore everyone else. But, you know.
Look, the show's turned me to Julia. I care. I only care because I remember that I used to care.
And that really is as good a place as any to go off of. So, which one do I do first?
That's it for this edition of the podcast.
Damn it, I had it. That's it for this edition of the podcast. Thanks for listening. We have to go now. The Kraken has us working on our own pamphlets to explain to people the wonders of living in the Kraken.
I feel like there's another joke to be made off of that, but I don't have it on the tip of my tongue.
Yeah.
Like, what is the name of that pamphlet? That's the question.
Living it with Kraken?
No, just like, you know, this the same like advice thing as like, instead of you're probably not going to hell, just like, you know.
So you find yourself in a Kraken. Or so you find yourself in a Kraken. It's not so bad. Like that?
Something like that. That like just like sea monsters. Pros and cons.
So you've been eaten by the Kraken. It's not all bad.
Could be worse.
Yeah, it could be worse. That could work. Sure. You want that one?
Yeah.
Okay. We have to go now. The Kraken's having us work on our own pamphlets called Eaten by the Kraken. Could be worse.
Eaten by the Kraken? Could be worse. I don't know. I feel like eaten by the Kraken is a question mark.
Fine. Oh, you want the question mark, the Kraken, and then could be worse to be a statement?
Well, I actually like that. I like the so you've been eaten by the Kraken.
Okay, so you've been eaten by the Kraken. Well, fine. Okay. But you want the question mark that could be worse?
It just it's like kind of equivocal, just kind of like could be worse.
Okay, so you want a statement?
I guess. Yeah.
Thanks for listening. We have to go now. The Kraken's having us work on our own informative pamphlets. Thanks for listening. We have to go now. The Kraken's having us work on our own informative pamphlets. So you've been eaten by the Kraken. Could be worse.
That works.
There you go.
All right.
Wow, we really did do I was like, here's the Quentin and Julia storyline static, and that was best of this podcast.
Yeah, well, everything else was fucking bullshit. Totally useless, stupid, goddamn.
I mean, you obviously posted the last podcast. You got my stuff last time, right?
Yeah. Why? What do you mean?
Usually when I pull it, it doesn't stay in the folder any longer. But for whatever reason, my 10's still there in the music folder. It's just weird.
Yeah. I don't know. Sometimes I pull it. Sometimes I copy it. I don't know.
Huh. I don't know. Weird. Um, so you've been eaten by the crack. Yeah, the static, which is exceptionally funny. Which is exceptionally funny because I'm just like, oh, you've ruined the Elliot storyline. He was on the good guys. Now you've like, they could still turn this Elliot storyline around though. It's possible.
It's just it's all over the fucking place.
But they have to acknowledge things like you're saying, like, so Elliot seems to be a little bit okay with doing some terrible things. We want to address that, guys? Maybe. And they're like, no. I'm like, no, I think we need to address that. Let's see, it's in there. Whatever. Soon you'll be able to watch Legion. You'll be much happier then. It's only 8 episodes. And plus, there'll be more Fargo soon. So you can just watch all the Holly. With W. McGregor.
What? I wasn't even listening. What?
I was thinking you'll be able to watch another season of Fargo too.
Yeah.
With W. McGregor.
Yeah, that'll be good. So Sam, so we've been playing a lot of Arkham Horror lately, and Sam picked up some bunch of like deck boxes and like card storage stuff for that, and also for like all his waifu cards, and I'm like putting the Arkham away in the big box, and he's like he's got like a binder, and he's like, I'm gonna pull out all my waifu cards and then figure out like which ones I have too many of, so they go in the extras pile. And then he's like kind of halfway through that, and he's like, this is really dumb. This is going to take me hours and hours. It's going to have like almost no benefit, and I can't go back now. And he's just like, why did I do this?
I mean, I don't know what he was thinking. They're all commons. Who cares? Worth
like
it roughly are.
It's like I had a vague organizing system beforehand. Now it's all gone.
Oh, let me do this because you asked.
Do what? Are you replying to my email?
I'm partially replying to it. There. Small reply to you.
I got an email.
There you go, employee. Have your email.
I'm your subordinate, not your employee. You don't pay me.
You're right. You are. Yeah. Look, minion, there's your note.
Well, we need to play this out slightly better because you need to know when I need to watch Legion.
I literally, since I said the segment part is whatever the fuck we want, you can pick the time you wish to do them. We have 4. I don't give a fuck when we talk about it. The movie segment, I think, is one we do differently because we've already said there's a bunch, and then suddenly we can now talk about, pick like a group of 12 movies and we just talk about 2 or 3 each time quickly.
Yeah.
So we're like, this week we're going to talk about these early films, split yada yada. This week we're going to talk about the March movies, yada yada yada.
My off the top of my head suggestion to Sam was like we could do we could do like all the previous like Mummy movies leading up to the Mummy.
No. Well, first off, I've seen all the previous Mummy movies. I'm not rewatching them. So actually, this requires no work for me. So sure, why not? You really want to delve into? There's a couple things we get into. One, that Steven Sommers is like box office gold, but his films are shit. Rob Cohen only knows how to take over movies that are shit.
No, I don't mean that entire series. I meant more like watching the old Universal one and then the Hammer one and then like the first Brendan Fraser one.
No, you gotta watch the third one. That's when like the soul literally was out of everyone and they all died. Like they just took it, yanked it out of them, and just crushed it. I just want to watch the old Mummy. You just like, bro, watch all the mummies and see how the mummy has evolved. I'm like, no, don't feed Universal. That's feeding Universal's whole entire Universal. That's like Universal. Like, yes, exactly. This is why this is a great idea. Like, don't feed that.
Look, we gotta monetize this long tail archive.
Oh, look, you guys can give any ideas you want. I've said this, like whatever you want to do with the other subject, I don't really give a fuck about.
I mean, we definitely have to do the Mummy when it comes out because the episode where we were talking about the Mummy like a year ago is like still our most popular episode ever.
Oh, really? Is it because
I think so.
That's because you allowed me to? That's because I was like, all right, Monster Squad, we're gonna have this discussion, and then they got to. That's probably because I got to. That's the closest I'm ever gonna get. That's because it fit very well in the wheelhouse of like everyone had passion. I got to bring in both my like business knowledge into things that you and Sam won't let me have discussions about anymore, and.
Well, hold on. Let's see what the actual most popular episode is. Let's see. Game of Thrones, pretty popular. No, I guess it's not the most popular. So let me see. So our first one, actually, our first one is still the most popular, which I think is sensible. But beyond that, let's see. 73 for the Oscars finale, which is pretty good. I don't know if I have one that beats that.
Yeah, that doesn't count. That's like we did a special edition right after the Oscars happened.
No, the final one we did, the So Done.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. Yeah, so that was 73. Trying to see if one of the Game of Thrones.
Yeah, justify my Oscar stuff. Woo!
The first Game of Thrones one is 63. That's pretty good. 65 for the Gravity Falls.
It's good. Look, we'll talk about the Mummy. There's no way we're not going to talk about the Mummy. Come on.
Yeah, we do. We did talk about.
I'm going to talk about. We're going to talk again when the Mummy. We have to just wait because I need the Mummy to fail too, so I can combine this. Be like they're just going to pretend it didn't happen and start over again. This time with the Wolfman movie. The Creature of the Black Lagoon.
No, we've got to try and get that one up like right after the Mummy comes out.
Oh no, I have to. We can get it close, but I actually have to have a box. I need box office for that. It's actually important. So which is could be pretty soon afterward. We can get that week up. We do have to. We do have to actually. The box office is actually vitally important there.
Did you read Matt's article yet?
I'll read it tonight. I'm sure it's fine, but I'll read it tonight. Okay, there you are. Oh, sorry, bud. I'm hoping I'll read it tonight and get that done, and then I'm hoping tomorrow we can have a discussion about. We'll be able to plan out the script.
I don't know about tomorrow. Tomorrow's
I'm all right.
Passover.
All right, that's when you have to pretend you care about these things.
It's still like a family tradition that we do.
That's why I said you have to pretend you care about these things.
I don't know if I care, but I also don't know that I'm pretending.
You pretend to care for your family's sake, is my point, I guess.
No, because my family doesn't care either. Like my family, it's just it's a. You look at this wrong.
You're like, no one cares. It's just something we do. I'm like, okay.
Well, I mean, nobody takes it seriously as like a religious occasion. Is my point. It's just like, it is just something we do, but we like doing it together. That's all.
Fine, we'll do it on Tuesday then.
Okay. Well, my time is getting freer, so it's good timing, I guess.
Entertainment, like screw you. Okay, but yeah, that works. We'll try to do this, and I'll try. I haven't done. And then I mean, if Matt's is done, right? It's just I have to approve it, then it goes up.
Yeah, I didn't have any changes, but if you have changes, you can.
I mean, if I see anything, I'll do it. If not, I'll just post it.
Okay.
Probably tomorrow, but.
Sounds like a neat game.
I'll try to get mine to fill before to finish. Hopefully, to get that done, and then.
Okay. I don't care.
And then we'll be able to get that up, and then hopefully I'll be able to go and I can get. Hope I'll be able to go. And at least I now have things to write immediately because I have like 3 anticipated to write, so I can get those up pretty quickly. Well, technically I have 4 to write, but.
Actually, so I have to drive up and down. So can I call you at like 5? 3 your time.
You can try.
Okay.
And we'll see what happens there.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. That works. And we'll figure some stuff and some other things.
Okay.
Right. I mean, yeah. At this point, probably like I said, is for the podcast. If this is roughly that you guys need, just propose a bunch of ideas you want to have. We'll just do what we normally do, and then I'll propose a bunch of things I might want to talk about, and then and we go from there.
Right.
There's a couple of Netflix shows I wouldn't mind talking about.
Well, we'd certainly. I mean. There's a Daily Show joke where he was like Trump needs to build a wall out of something that's really difficult to get through. Iron Fist, maybe. And I was like, oh, it's so true. I'm only like 8 episodes in or something. It's so terrible.
At least you're at the part where things get slightly better. It just took too long.
I'm at the part where they just they fly to China. Okay.
I know. Hey, don't act if I've seen the show. I know.
But I'm saying like. You
mean when they flew to China and you met the person who could have been Iron Fist and you were like, oh, that dude's way better.
No, I literally like they just kind of landed in China and they're standing around going like, how do we infiltrate this?
He hasn't fought
I'll just punch my way in and his friends are like, you're a a Danny. Let us do it.
He hasn't fought the Drunken Master yet?
No, he hasn't fought the Drunken Master yet.
So the Drunken Master is the dude who was like second in line to play Iron Fist. So when you see this guy, you're just going to be like, oh, God. No, the reason it's get better is because in the last episodes they fully introduced the actual villains and like the setup villain in the future, and both those guys are really interesting. And you're like, oh, cool. Why the fuck weren't they more in the earlier parts of the goddamn series? Wait, have you met Danny's love interest? Like, did they have the episode where like her master shows up?
Danny's love interest master just showed up but hasn't like done anything yet.
Okay, no, but that's one of the characters, so he's really interesting.
Yeah.
And so like the last 5 episodes of Iron Fist, the one thing I give credit for Iron Fist about is, unlike the rest of the shows, like it actually ends somewhat well. Like where some of them some of the other ones fizzle out a little bit at the end, it actually ends well. It's just you didn't sit there entire time going, I don't understand, why was none of this at the beginning of the show? Why did you think this stuff was important? And then you stab your eyes out.
Yeah, I don't know if we talked about it, but I did finish Luke Cage, and the end of that show was like, why
Yeah.
Why did this devolve so badly?
Yeah, you know that ending is so bad. It ends, and I went, "That's the end." What the fuck?
But like
Just happened?
the best, like, most unique part of that show is the part where like he is fighting Cottonmouth like over like who has the better neighborhood reputation.
Yeah.
And like
Cottonmouth's
that's
great.
like unique and fascinating and like entertaining and cool. And then
Cottonmouth
it's just
gets
like all
killed.
fucking downhill
And
from
then
there. Yeah.
Cottonmouth dies, and then like
After a weird like child abuse episode, like very special flashback thing.
And then he
That came
dies,
out of
and then
nowhere.
everything, and it, basically we lose Mahershala Ali, and everything goes to shit.
We lose Mahershala Ali. We don't lose the fucking Congress lady who, like, I haven't hated a black woman in a TV show since the Lieutenant in Dexter. Well, I guess she's not black, but whatever.
She does a minority woman.
Yeah, she's a minority woman. I'm sorry.
I like her at times. She has some interesting stuff with like potentially because similar version of like what she wants for Harlem, but they don't do enough with her. And then she goes full gangster, and it ruins whatever good she could have had. And
also, Shades is like way too important of a character in that show for what he is.
I know. Trust me.
He's just like, it's like some weird meta joke on like the henchman who just like keeps surviving and affecting the plot. And it's like, what is even happening here? This is a dude whose character concept is he wears sunglasses a lot. What are you doing?
Like I said, the end of Luke Cage is awful. So the end of Iron Fist is not awful. And it introduces some interesting characters, and it actually fixes it. Like Ward's character like Sam and I said, Ward's character is actually really interesting. They just broke him at the beginning of the series, and he can't come back from it. But like everything else about that character works.
Well, also the middle, because like he's like, it's not just what he does to Danny in the beginning, it's also like he does that to Danny. He's like been on drugs and embezzling from the company. We find out halfway through he murders his father.
Oh, the father thing. Trust me, the father thing is fine. That's not an issue at all, man. His father's a terrible person. No, the middle part is fine, but that should have been his beginning part.
Mm.
He recovered. Like, if let's say you didn't have the beginning part where he tries to murder a hobo,
yeah,
and you get rid of that, and his first response isn't murder, and instead it's just he's a dick, and then he's addicted to drugs, and his dad's gotten the stuff, and then he kills his dad. He can recover from all those things.
Yeah.
Because when you see at the end of the series kind of where he is in his struggles, you're like, oh, this makes sense. The problem is also the actor's not necessarily the best choice because we're not positive he's the best to portray the conflicted nature. Instead, he's just evil.
Right.
And that's the other problem.
The actor needed to be like more likable just as a person.
By the end, it works a little bit better, but then they break his sister. So like, The problem is also the sister. There's a moment in the show where the sister clearly has to follow what happens in the comics.
Yeah.
But they don't actually justify her getting to that point. So it feels like
she's all over the place the whole time.
Right. And so, but yeah, the end is actually, like I said, Bakuto makes things a lot better. And eventually you're going to meet Danny's friend from Leon Yu, whatever it's called. I never can remember. I always pronounce it.
Kunlun.
I always instead mix it up with the Arrow Island.
Yeah.
What's his name? I can't remember his name, but the friend the friends he always talks about, like where he's like, me and this guy did this fun stuff. He eventually shows up, but he's also really interesting. And suddenly the show works because actual interesting characters are on screen with Danny.
Yeah.
As opposed to bullshit characters. Because Danny's like whatever, he's fine. Like he's not the show's my issue with the show is not
he's boring as fuck. That's the problem. Like Luke Cage, Jessica Jones, and Matt Murdock. Like if you took them out of their entire show and put them in a different random show, they would still be interesting. Those people are the most interesting part of any room that they're in. Danny Rand is completely the opposite.
I guess my point is like he's not why the show's bad when he's bad. Is my only point. He's a little boring. He also, by the end, improves a little bit because they figure out his character enough to where, like, I think a second season of Iron Fist could work, or just Iron Fist in general could work because if his characters removed from the clusterfuck they left in his show, and it's just his character, and his character could actually work.
I mean, there's a version of this character that could work, and I'm sure we'll see it in the Defenders because those people are competent showrunners.
Well, right. Even Scott Buck is no longer in charge of things. Yes.
Yes.
The show, yes, he's gonna be fine. That's my point. My only sadness is that I thought for sure their smart response was they weren't going to do a season 2 of Luke Cage. or a season 2 of Iron Fist. They're going to do just Heroes for Hire.
Yeah.
Instead, they already greenlit a season 2 of Luke Cage, and they're like, and they haven't greenlit Iron Fist yet, but they probably will. And I'm like, that's the wrong answer. I mean, I can accept that maybe in Luke Cage's case, to like, look, we really like this blaxploitation thing we did, and we want to have more shows like that, so we want another season of that. But there's like no justification for their season of Iron Fist. I'm just like, no, put him in Heroes for Hire. That's where he belongs, because the Danny becomes interesting when him and Luke Cage are together, because their friendship is fascinating. Because the whole point of their friendship is Luke Cage is this dude from the fucking, from Harlem, and Danny is like this privileged like dude. And that's why, for example, when casting Iron Fist, for example, it would not actually have worked to cast as a black person.
Yeah.
Asian would have still worked, because that would have been fine. But like, if there is actually some legitimate reasons for some races not working there. But speaking of racial, I saw Ghost of Shell last night, and
yeah, I haven't seen it yet, but I do want to.
It's fine. You'll probably find this thing. I mean, it's fine. Like, Scarlett Johansson's not the problem in that movie. She's fine. My bigger problem was that it felt like too many other key roles were white people. It was like, let's say I buy the synopsis that you need Scarlett Johansson to scale this movie. Fine. Well, then, like, the doctor who's with her needs to, like, not be white. One of the villains makes sense as being white, because actually Johansson's character, nerd-wise, makes sense for being white in the movie, because half the movie is, like, this idea of, like, identity. So that actually works. And so, by extension, one of the other villains works. One of the other villains, though, is white, and I'm like, why? And then her sidekick, like the main other dude, makes sense being white. I don't think he's actually not supposed to be Japanese in the show. I think that's a big point, is he's like giant and like foreign and blonde. And usually when people are blonde in animes, they aren't supposed to be Japanese.
Yeah.
It's actually, it's like a code. It's like one of the coded things. But there was enough stuff. It really wasn't, it was one of those ones where it's not really that bad of a movie. It just wasn't good enough to overcome the negative backlash that comes from the casting. Also, Rupert Sanders keeps getting movies. I don't understand why.
Who is that?
It's the guy who did the first Snow White movie. And then, like, he may have even done the second one. I don't understand how he keeps getting movies. He's not that good of a director. I just don't understand. I don't know. All right, I need to go eat, because I think Brian and I are going to go see Your Name in like an hour, but I need to eat before that. Because it's out here, and I'm like excited for others to be able to see the greatness.
Okay.
But yeah, we'll, I guess, talk on Tuesday. I'll text you tomorrow. You can call me if I can pick it up.
I'll call you tomorrow. Either I will get you on the way there, or I will get you on the way back.
All right, that's it.
Hey.